Hey everyone, welcome back to the Tent of Abraham. I'm Tamir Kreisman from Jerusalem, Israel. This is Parashat Beshalach, when he sent, Exodus 13:17 to 17:16. This one's called No Doubt, and welcome to the other side. So I have one thing to say. A new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. Do not forget how that story plays out and how it ends, okay? All right. See, I know people are scared, so much so that I know for a fact people who see what is and choose to completely deny what they see because of fear. The mind will block out trauma. We know this, I hope. Especially trauma from our past. It's too much for our system to handle. And this is how people shut down. This is how to kill the spirit. This is how to conform society. If I just keep my head down and I do what I'm told, those that obviously have my best interests at heart, everything is gonna be okay. And they said to them, "May the Lord look upon you and judge, for you have brought us into foul odor in the eyes of Pharaoh, and in the eyes of his servants, to place a sword into their hands and to kill us." What kind of odor do you think you emitted to Pharaoh and his servants beforehand? What system are you trying to get in with exactly? The only thing worse than vermin is stinky vermin. This is also what living in denial looks like. And I use the word living, very sarcastically, of course. Now, I'm not here to tell you what comes next, because like I said last time, I don't know. Or whatever. But all I do know is that God knows. Okay, so we follow him. And God gave our prophets and sages the answers. And they have given the answers to us. These answers, which I've read to you time and time again over the past few months. There's so much censorship going on right now. And please understand, I'm not speaking openly. But for as long as I can, I will be speaking. Okay? But if those self-appointed powers that be had any idea, any knowledge or respect of the things that are being discussed here, I would have been silenced a very long time ago. I'm, of course, speaking of Torah, but please keep your ears open, okay? And heed my warning. They are silencing the Torah as well. Don't forget where I'm sitting. These are all part of the times that have been given to us, to this current generation. You understand how challenging it has to get? Do you understand how challenging it has to get? Do you think this is tough now? We're on vacation now. It's inconvenient at best. And of most of the world, as well as the Jews, here and abroad, are waiting for things to go back to normal. When things go back to normal. Hilarious. You see, the world, which has been exposed more and more because of the crowning, right? The crown. And people still choose to call that normal and can't wait to go back there. You see where the world is at. This is the severity of the situation. When logic, heart, spirit, and everything that is holy would dictate that this normal is anything but, and yet logical, spiritual, and innocent people yearn for it. Why do we need this redemption now? Let's go back to Egypt, where we're sitting on a platter of meat, right? We don't need this redemption now. We're good. Let's just go back to how everything was. Are we learning from things? I don't know. I will show this to them in their face, and they will not see. They will not see what is right in their faces. When the Torah and the sages say, like no time ever before, that means like no time ever before. I told you, Mashiach is bringing judgment. This is not my opinion. Sure, he can come in mercy, but if we are honest with ourselves and we are looking at the situation of everything, including our own lives, you understand that judgment has to precede mercy. This has to happen, and judgment comes for everyone depending on where they are at. It's a cleansing process. The only question is, how much judgment will ensue, and who's going to get it to what capacity? And so I have told you, do not rely on me or on anyone else for your Torah fill. Torah is not to be learned over video, okay? It can help. Sure, do it, but this is not your base. This is not your source. It can guide and perhaps give new perspectives. I hope I'm, helping you scratch your heads over there, but I keep encouraging you. Go dig for yourself. Go learn for yourself. But you never rely on videos for bread, okay? You have the Torah, read it, and then read it again. Read the Parsha. Read this Parsha. Because what does this Parsha discuss? In short, the children of Israel were expecting one thing. Listen to me. Just please listen. The children of Israel were expecting one thing, hoping for a certain, how shall we say, outcome. And they didn't get what they wanted, so they were complaining about it. They started to break down to the point where God had to tell them, shush, be silent. The Lord will fight for you, but you shall remain silent. Hashem yilachem lachem v'atem tacharishun. Shush. And we'll get to that. But right now, it came to pass when Pharaoh let the people go, that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, for it was near. For it was near because God said, lest the people reconsider when they see war and return to Egypt. What does this verse mean? I spoke of this in last year's Parashat Matot Maseh. You could check it out. It's titled For Heaven's Sake. And if you missed it, it was a whole teaching on the tribe of Ephraim and who they miscalculated the time of the Exodus, the time of the redemption, and they left 30 years earlier. And they left the brothers in Egypt, they went out, okay, and they got slaughtered, right? So they got slaughtered by the Philistines on the way to the land of Canaan. They were never buried, but they were left in a valley, also known as the Valley of the Dry Bones. The same Valley of Dry Bones that Ezekiel speaks of and who he raised from the dead. These same Ephraimites who rose from the dead then returned to Israel while their brethren were captured and taken into Babylon. So there could always be even the slightest Jewish presence in the land of Israel. This was between the two temples. However, those specific Ephraimites, those who were raised from the dead, who did not go through the Exodus together with their brothers, who did not receive the Torah with their brothers, who did not go through the 40 years in the wilderness with their brothers, they did not enter into the land of Israel with their brothers. And therefore, they do not have a share in the land of Israel. They are always welcome, but they specifically do not. They'll sit wherever in the tribe of Ephraim, but they specifically do not have a share. We know this from Masechet Psachim and the story of Rabbi Yehuda ben Batera, who was a great sage and a descendant of those who were resurrected from the dead in Ezekiel chapter 37. So you can check out this teaching, or at least the part I discussed. It's around the 31-minute mark from Parashat Matot Maseh, titled For Heaven's Sake. Check that out. It'll help for context and effect of this study for this study. So maybe you should. Anyway, one of the many things we can learn from this, in short, is that even the children of Israel, of the tribe of Ephraim, misread the signs of the times. They miscalculated the time of redemption. And these are the grandchildren of Jacob himself. But the bottom line is this. The children of Israel could have been redeemed quicker, without the sea having to split, without going through 40 years in the wilderness, and without sinning with the golden calf, of course. And that was only if they would have taken the shortcut. But the shortcut and what they would have to go through would have broken them completely. They weren't ready. They couldn't handle the truth, as they would have to walk through the piles of bones of their slain brethren who never found peace and burial. You have to bury a body. Is very serious spiritual implications. The soul is never at rest, which means that what might be perceived as a shortcut, right? We want it now, is really no shortcut at all, but rather a deal breaker. We would not be able to handle it, right? We discussed if Mashiach comes quicker, the judgment is going to be more severe, unless if it's drawn out a little bit more. But still, what are we doing on the ground, right? Classic example. Here we go. So how do we know this? Because how do we know that this is a better way? Because God literally said so. Again, because God said, lest the people reconsider when they see war and return to Egypt. In other words, if people nowadays were to get what they want, once the truth would be revealed, they would not be able to handle it, and they would beg to go back to normal, to what is considered normal in the world. That's how bad it is. Okay? All right. And this war is not war, it's carnage. As it is, they were in a complete state of shock, they have confusion, what's going on, we don't know what's happening, is this happening, is that happening? You're not ready for what's coming. Nevertheless, they had to go through, I'm speaking Torah, of course. Nevertheless, they had to go through the Red Sea. They had to receive the Torah at Sinai. They had to sin with the golden calf, and they had to go through 40 years in the wilderness. Why? Why did they have to do this? We've been through this so many times. This is the same concept of the struggle of the butterfly, right? When the butterfly busts out of the cocoon, it has a tremendous struggle to break through its shell. It looks like it's struggling, right? That same shell that kept it safe and was evolving from a caterpillar, as it was evolving from a caterpillar into a butterfly. Now, if you cut the butterfly's cocoon open for him, right, so he won't have to struggle to get out, even if he manages to crawl out, he'll be dead in a matter of minutes. Why is this? Because the same struggle that he has to break through is what develops his muscles so he could spread his wings and fly away. Otherwise, he's dead. You understand? This struggle is what the children of Israel had to go through in order to make it through the day. Meaning, if you are conditioned in a positive way, you can face and overcome all things. The children of Israel over the 40 years in the wilderness were being conditioned for generations to come. We are here as a result of that. But please, take note. The adversary does exactly the same thing to you, as we are all being conditioned in the world today to react according to how we are programmed. We are. Which is why I say again, never go with the majority. If you're in the minority of the minority, you might be okay, and then still, you got to question. If you are the crazy one and everybody else is sane, then you're okay. Okay? Every day, I wake up, I look at the world, I look around me, and I feel like I'm taking my crazy pills here, okay? One day at a time. So as we see, there is always a purpose for everything and anything that God does, as well as how he does them and when he does them. If it's something we don't understand, wait. Savlanut. Savlanut means patience. It comes from the word also lisbol, sevel, suffering. It's an Israel. It's an Italian thing, but in Israel means wait a minute. Probably not a positive thing elsewhere, but this is what it is in Israel. It means wait. Another example of taking the scenic route instead of the shortcut was because Egypt had to pay. Things don't only happen for one reason, they happen for several. God is very efficient like that. We discussed this in last year's teaching that the reason, or one of the reasons, that God led the children of Israel through Yam Suf was so he could drown the Egyptians. So in essence, the children of Israel were used as bait. Nothing was going to happen to them, but hey, look where they are. Go get them. Okay. And we were never in danger, as you see. The only thing that could have harmed Israel was fear or complaining. But this is how it starts, which is the same thing today. That's the only thing that can harm Israel. And that's what happens from there. Because there's so much more. But we can only hope and pray that the wrath of God is kindled against those who would harm his children in his land after everything we've been through. And yet, in the same token, we know very well that our faith is to be tested more so than any generation in our history. I'll say this again, because if there's one thing for you to take away, it's this. You're being tested. Our faith of the final generation will be tested more so than any generation in our history. Know this. Remember this. And we always look at Egypt as both a blueprint and an outline for that, for all the struggle, especially for the redemption. So God led the people around by the way of the desert of the Red Sea, and the children of Israel were armed when they went up out of Egypt. Listen up. There is a very important and hidden concept within the way God did things right here. We all know God can do whatever he wants, right? However he wants. He's the master of the universe. This is all his. Whatever he sees fit. But we also know that God does everything for our benefit. So even if it seems like it's bad, it's actually good. It's just beyond our comprehension. The answer in the Pshat right here, the simple text in verse 18, as to why they were led through the desert and the Red Sea instead of through the valley of the dry bones. While the result is in chapter 14, verse 14, which we mentioned earlier. The Lord will fight for you, but you shall remain silent. And I said, we will get to it. But now, V'chamushim alu bnei Israel, and Israel were armed. Yes, this is true. The children of Israel, who were nothing more than slaves, not by any means soldiers, who hardly had any physical strength, let alone the mental and emotional capacity to actually go to war with Egypt or anyone. In last year's teaching, we read that the tribes split into 4 groups. The first one was Reuven, Shimon, and Issachar. They were contemplating suicide. We're going to throw ourselves in the sea. The second group, Zebulun, Benjamin, and Naphtali. They said, let's go run back to the Egyptians and surrender. Please take us back. We're so sorry. Let's go build the bricks. Let's go get some pyramids done, y'all. 3, Judah, Joseph, which is basically Ephraim and Menashe. They said, screw this. We're doing battles. This is why we got our gear. We're going to battle right now. We're going to fight the Egyptians, which in a sense is suicide, but they're not taking us out alive, right? And 4, Levi, Gad, and Asher. Confusion. What did they say? We're going to run right in the middle of them and go, and maybe they'll get confused and then we'll be able to split, right? Moses answered each of these groups according to their intentions or their inclinations. Again, this is from last year's teaching. You could go check that out, but I'm just making a point over here. Which group would you identify with the most? To give us a slightly better and perhaps closer to home understanding by which we may closer be able to identify, we can speak of some more recent times. 1. During the Holocaust, there were Jews who saw what was done to their families and their communities by the Nazis and feared falling into their hands more so than death itself. They might be tortured, right, or whatever. So they took their own lives because they saw what they might have to go through, or even worse. That's the group number 1. Group number 2. Most Jews surrendered with the hopes that indeed those work camps, as the Germans presented it, would bring liberty. Work is freedom. Okay, see, that's a head in the ground type situation. 3, few Jews rebelled. This is Judah, right? Few Jews rebelled against the Nazis. There's the Mered Ghetto Varsha, the Warsaw Ghetto Rebellion. They rebelled against the Nazis, and they stood their ground against a far greater enemy than they, obviously. We're talking about a few dozen, maybe a few hundred against armies with tanks and whatnot in the buildings. They knew very well that they were not going to repel the dark forces of the National Socialist regime, but they would be damned if they were going to allow the Germans to just round them up like animals and send them off in trains to their deaths. No, I'm going to die on my feet fighting, and I'll take down a Nazi or two with me. And 4, and even fewer Jews, those who could, of course, chose to flee, hide, or change their identities. Few survived to tell the stories. Okay, most did not. So given this specific situation, who is to say what we as individuals might have done? I guess it all depends on where we were at the time, what our situation was, what kind of people we were, as well as when this all took place, and if or not we saw this coming. The smart ones got out to begin with, right? Before, but again, I digress. What would you do? What would you do? We already know that the Holocaust was not right before the coming of the final redemption, because, well, we're still here and Mashiach is not, correct? I mean, afterwards they did. My grandmother told me. When they got liberated from Auschwitz, she was looking at the sky. It's like, okay, where's Mashiach? We just went through hell. And Mashiach never came. It's a process, right? Again, these are those very specific times. I got other relatives who are like, they completely abandoned God and religion because they're like, I want to know if chosen people and that, no, not for me. Forget it. Anyway, you can't judge anybody over there. I told you, if you go through hell, angel, sinless. You just went through Gehinnom here on earth. Anyway, right now we are certainly closer than ever before. They were not in Israel at the time, even though they have been through hell, as the last generation supposedly will have to go through. So says everyone. But they were not in Israel at the time. We are in Israel at the time. And now here we are. Now the difference between the Exodus and the Holocaust is that the children of Israel were not going to be harmed, not a single one. As opposed to the Holocaust, which, as we have learned from the words of the Ramchal last week, that it all depends on the timelines of God. If this is the timeline, even the righteous will not be spared. You understand? But they will merit their righteousness. So, what would you do? What's the right answer? A, B, C, or D? Is there a right answer? See, the correct answer is there is none. You see, we are at a point right now that Mashiach can come any day, at any moment, which we must actively wait for. Nevertheless, we know that certain things absolutely must take place first. But we also know that when Israel does tshuva, all of Israel, that's it. We skip over everything. But it doesn't seem like we're headed in that direction at all. In fact, all the powers that be are doing everything to make sure that doesn't happen. The thing is, once the ball starts rolling, time is going to speed up. Things are going to be overlapping, which is why I keep telling you, there is no time. Because once it starts, it might come upon you like the clouds of darkness, and it'll catch you where you stand, unable to move, unable to breathe. Every day, you get ready. You prepare your neshama before God, because judgment is coming. I know you all have plans. I speak to a lot of you. You want to do a lot of things, and I keep telling you I don't know how much time there is left. Okay? So first things first. Go on with your plans. Go on with your life. But every single day you make sure that you present your neshama before God. That's how you go to sleep at night, because you don't know what tomorrow brings. The final redemption is like the first redemption, acharit kereshit, and we should act accordingly. There will be suffering by the hands of the nations, but in the same token, there will be salvation and retribution, which is why you don't want to be a Jew anywhere else in the world except in Israel. And make no mistake, Unfortunately, what's happening here, which most of you are not, I don't think anybody's aware, at least half of Israel is not aware. What's happening here is much worse than anyone could have possibly imagined. I certainly did not see this coming. Nevertheless, there's no place like home. And there's no place I'd rather be. So we have to believe that if Moses were here now, he would tell us the same thing that he did back then. Don't be afraid. Stand firm and see the Lord's salvation, that he will wreak for you today. The Lord will fight for you, but you shall remain silent. The children of Israel were completely terrified, especially where they were, as they saw no way out, when all they could do was cry out. Again, you could listen to last year's teaching for a reference. I'm kind of working it all. They were completely surrounded. They had nowhere to go, nothing left to do. Could we go here? Could we try? All the options were exhausted. What does it say at the end of days? En lanu al mi lishen. Rak al Avinu shebashamayim. We have no one, nothing to lean on. There is no salvation anywhere. I believe these words of the sages. I believe these words. You understand? And it would seem, but people are still running, maybe this, maybe that, maybe this, maybe that, but no one is looking where they need to go look. So we know, because of that, what is coming next. Today, really, this is all we can do. All we can do is cry out. Nothing else has any kind of meaning. If you think you're supposed to be fighting something or someone here with fists or guns, then you are not in the situation that I am describing right now. But if you are Israel, then don't be afraid. Stand firm and see the Lord's salvation that he will wreak for you today. For the Lord will fight for you, and you shall remain silent. Do you know why you shall remain silent? Because as we've all been shown, we have no idea what's going on. What if you start a ruckus and it goes completely against God's plan? This is what people are doing. People are protesting. What are they they don't even know what they're protesting here in Israel. Like, really, if they actually knew what was going on? But they're in the system. Yeah, let them do their thing. Keep them say, yeah, you're getting stuff done. Unaware, misinformed. It's unbelievable. But what are you going to do? Because we have all been shown. We have no idea what's going on. We only know what we are shown. And we know that everything is a lie. And it was at that very moment when the children of Israel were so afraid that they would have done anything and everything just not to stay in their current. I'll kill myself. I'll run back in. I'll go fight it, but just not here. I cannot be here where I am right now. This is panic mode, right? They cannot be in their current position. Don't be afraid. They're giving the answer right here. Don't be afraid. Stand firm. See the Lord's salvation. He's going to fight for you. Remain silent. Because anything that you think you're going to do with your own idea or understanding is going against God's plan. Take these verses and write them down. Somewhere. In fact, write them down anywhere. Don't be afraid. Thus saith the Lord. Don't be afraid. Stand firm and see the Lord's salvation that he will reap for you today. For the Lord will fight for you, and you shall remain silent. Write that down. Wake up to that every day. Understand this. Read it when you are afraid. Read it. Read it every day, especially now. Because by nature, people fear that which they do not know, that which they do not understand. And right now, everyone is clueless. And don't think for one moment that they are in control of anything. That's an illusion. Ultimately, their fight is not with you. It's with God. And so, this is God's fight. And here is your answer to the question that you might not have even asked, but you should. This is a very important and hidden concept within the way God does things right here. So God led the people around by the way of the desert to the Red Sea, and the children of Israel were armed when they went up out of Egypt. Yes, they were armed for whatever dangers might have come with weapons of war. But also, not by military force and not by physical strength, but by my spirit, says the Lord of hosts. Zechariah 4:6. You want to arm yourselves just in case for the sake of hishtadlut, making an effort? Go ahead. Even King Solomon had a great army that was never used because Israel was at peace with the whole world at the time. So the army was for show, but he did hishtadlut, right? We lock our doors at night. Why? We hope, but we lock them anyway. What are you going to do? Even Jacob placed stones around his head as a form of protection, even though it didn't, technically speaking, it wouldn't protect anything, but I'm doing my ishtadlut, you take care of the rest. No problem. You just got to do 1%. God will hit the 99. But you must remember, it is not your army that will save you, nor is it a magic cure, which is anything but. The second and most widely accepted understanding of chamushim is, as we discussed last week, that only a fifth of the children of Israel who were in Egypt managed to leave. You should probably write that down too. As the rest were taken out in the darkness with many of the idolatrous Egyptians. Because, why? They really loved the way things were. And the third understanding of this word is that from that moment that they began to ascend out of Egypt, they started to ascend the 50 gates of purity towards Binah. And we can understand this from the next word in the verse. V'chamushim alu bnei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim. It doesn't say yatz'u, went out, but rather alu, ascended, like to make aliyah. When you move to Israel, you make aliyah, you ascend, spiritually speaking. And so, might I propose that all three actually took place. Only a fifth of the children of Israel did leave Egypt, but were armed with the ascending levels of purity. See, that was their armor. Those were their weapons of war. And again, this was not done for their sakes, but for God's name's sake, who swore to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. There's only one thing that can and will save us. And this is the only thing that we can do. This is the purpose of everything. They were very frightened, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. What's going to get you to cry out to the Lord? Oh, you mean the whole world and your complete annihilation? It has to come to this? So be it. So be it. If this is what it's going to take for the children of Israel to cry out to the Lord, to not want to give in, to not want to go fight battles that are useless battles, to not want to hide, to not want to run, to not want to kill themselves, but to stand firm and be silent. If the whole world has to come upon them for this to happen, this is what God is going to do. This is what's going to end this world and start God's world as it should be. This doesn't mean just to cry out because times are, help me. Yeah, that's not what it means. It means that Israel completely and utterly recognized God's sovereignty. You understand? Because if you cry out to somebody for help when it's the moment of truth, people aren't going to start praying to their wooden idols, save me, right? Even when it came down to that, when Abraham spoke to his father, he said, what are you talking about? It's a piece of wood. I carved it. It has no power. Abraham's like, aha, that's what I'm talking about. When it comes down to the moment of the truth, right? What is it? There are no atheists in foxholes. Oh, God, help me, please, God. Okay. It's going to come down to that, you understand, because it's written. So, once Israel recognizes God's sovereignty, until this happens, they were frightened. Frightened, anyone? They were very frightened, and they were scared to death. They started doing illogical things. Wait, the pressure is not tough enough. They started siding themselves with their enemies. Maybe I'll do what they tell me and everything will be okay. They started killing themselves. I don't want to be here anymore. I don't believe, and we're done. Heck, and some even started acting violently towards their brothers. Some fled for their lives. This is panic mode. I still don't see the children of Israel crying out to the Lord. I see the children of Israel doing anything but. I see the children of Israel complaining. I see the children of Israel forgetting. I see the children of Israel doubting. I see the so-called spiritual leaders of Israel giving mixed messages to the poor people who live and breathe by their every word. And let me tell you, that's not biblical. And if there is conflict, okay? Because there are those that say this and there are those that say that. Then there's only one thing to do, really. And this is scriptural and biblical. And that is to go according to the Torah and halacha. And within halacha, particularly when it comes to hilchot kashrut, the laws of kosher food, anything but in particular, there's a saying, Im yesh safek, ein safek. If there is a doubt, safek, doubt, there is no doubt. Meaning, hear me now, that if there is even the slightest chance that something is not kosher or is not koshered properly, even if you believe it to be, even if you are told that it is, I don't know, let's say that you're told that it's 95% safe, kosher, then because there is a doubt is even a fraction of a percent, you understand? Because there is a doubt, there is no doubt. And you do not eat that food or use that vessel. Or in other words, you do not put that which has a doubt in your body. So says halacha. Because as we know, and as we have learned, what we put into our bodies has a direct effect on our nefesh, our life source. No, biblical, not conspiracy. Leviticus 17:11. Why are rabbis not talking about this, I wonder? For the nefesh, for the life force of the flesh is in the blood, and I have therefore given it to you to be placed upon the altar to atone for your nefesh. For it is the blood that atones for the nefesh. Okay, ki nefesh habasar badam, the nefesh, your connection to God is where it's in the blood. Okay, our blood is our life source, according to the infallible word of God. Meaning that which we put into our bodies, according to God, may change our blood, our life source. That's why we have to eat certain things and not eat certain things and how we make and all this stuff. Very, very strict, right? Do you understand? Are you listening? Are you hearing me? And that is why God gave us an entire book, the middle of the Torah, the book of Leviticus, the book that the Lubavitcher Rebbe called the heart of the Torah. This is the essence of the Torah. Great stories, Bereshit and Shmot and Bamidbar and Varim. But Vaikra, with the laws of kashrut in particular, this is the essence of everything. Why is it so important? There's no action in that book. The beating heart which pumps said life force. Even foods that are kosher must be properly cleansed and prepared before we put them into our body. Your body is a mikdash for God, is it not? Did we not learn this? This is the pshat. This is not even drash or anything. This is the simple text. Exodus 25:8. And they shall make me a sanctuary, and I will dwell inside them. I know it says in their midst. Hebrew, va'asuli mikdash v'shachanti betocham, inside them. And then obviously you go to all the commentaries saying, yes, it's not only the Mishkan, but we are the walking Mishkan, and so on. And how can God dwell inside this bodily temple, if you fill it with the most abominable things, or those which are not kosher, those that have a safek. Or an even scarier scenario, when the time comes and God tells Israel to move or to stand, you won't hear this call because you just separated yourself from Israel. God's not going to call you on the phone, nor will he be announcing anything on the news or on social media. Listen to me now. Do not sever that link. And God help you if you miss that call, when it counts. And so all you who have been blessed with ears, since there is a very clear safek, according to halacha, we must look at this word deeper still. The numerical value of safek, doubt, is 240. And what good is all the fear and confusion supposed to do except cause us to forget and to doubt who is in control? It's working so far. Which is why 240 is also the numerical value of Amalek. Remember those guys? You should. It's a positive command. Do you think it's a coincidence? You think it's a coincidence that Amalek are right here in this parsha as well, exactly at this time that they're presented, coming to attack Israel after all that had just transpired? No nation would dare come near Israel after the events in Egypt. Israel were all but untouchable. Some might even say invincible. The only ones who could harm Israel were Israel. 17:7. He named the place Massah, testing, and Meribah, quarreling. Because of the quarrel of the children of Israel and because of their testing the Lord, saying, is the Lord in our midst or not? After everything they had seen, after everything they had witnessed, they still quarreled and still they doubted? Is God with us or not? Oh, you doubt, do you? I'll give you doubt. Next verse. Amalek came and fought with Israel in Rephidim. Don't you see? And the doubt came and fought with Israel. Amalek is not a physical war with us today, although they are physically everywhere and quite easy to point at. They're very easy to point out, okay? But they attack Israel when they are spiritually weak because they know that this is how they expound upon the doubts. The little seeds of doubt, and we're going to go with that. And when Israel lose confidence in God, they lose their source of protection. But it's not that they only lose their source of protection. It's that God himself repays those who doubt. Midah keneged midah, measure for measure. So take a look at what happened, and then look around you at what continues to happen, keeping in mind that you are currently being tested. Remember that. And that there is a magnifying glass on your soul. You getting hot? It's getting hot in here. Your actions alone will determine that outcome. Israel were complaining because their lives were threatened. They were in the wilderness and there was no water, which is completely understandable. You know, they're concerned, well, there's no water. Okay, it's a life-threatening situation after all. Even though, again, they were never really in ever any danger. But what did they do instead of praying to the God who just proved to them and to the world that he controls all things? So the people quarreled with Moses and they said, give us water, man, that we may drink. Moses said to them, why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord? In other words, are you guys crazy? Are you out of your minds? The people thirsted there for water, and the people complained against Moses, and they said, why have you brought us up from Egypt to make me and my children and my livestock die of thirst. Yeah, you are definitely out of your minds. Because not only do you think these things after all the things that you've been through, but you dare to speak it out loud. You incite the people. Who incited the people? Vayerav ha'am. Erev Rav maybe? But it doesn't matter. Because with a few words, you can sweep a whole nation. It's called propaganda. Good morning. Because after all that you have seen, you allow yourself to get caught up in this. Again, be it real or not, this is not the point. Danger? Sure, real danger. But look where you're going and what you're doing. If they did not have water, was that a legitimate thing for them to be scared? Sure. But what did they do? They started complaining. They started going elsewhere instead of asking God. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not canceling out any potential life-threatening situations or anything. Okay? Understand what my focus is. After all you've seen, you allow yourself to get caught up in this. You just witnessed the most incredible thing that anyone in the world has ever witnessed until the end of time. And this is what you allow to happen. After everything, you doubt? Amalek came and fought with Israel and Rephidim. What? What? Oh, you mean they just happened to be in the neighborhood right now? God brought them to Israel. The Ramad said that Israel burned their hands of the Torah and the complete faith. They rid themselves of it because they contemplated these things and then they dared speak them. But again, it is important to note that not all of Israel fell here. So Moses said to Joshua, "Pick men for us and go out and fight against Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand." Who were these men that Joshua had to pick? These were the righteous ones of Israel to go do battle, right? The ones who had perfect faith. And they were the only ones who could counter and correct what many of their brethren had damaged. Now look at this. This is how you work according to God's system. God didn't tell Moses what to do here, if you've noticed, right? This is Moses calling the shots. He recognizes the situation, and still he's going along, you'll see. He recognizes the situation, and he knew what had to be done. Okay, we got to fight them, but now why did they come, right? When you go and you fight a battle, who are you going to call to assemble the warriors? A brave warrior or your servant who's like a Talmid Chacham, right? We'll call him a rabbi. Who's going to fight the wars? Who's going out to physically fight the wars? The warriors or the rabbis? According to the world's logic, it would dictate that obviously you want to get an experienced veteran to assemble and rally the troops. But this isn't the situation here now, is it? Okay? Moses called on Joshua because Joshua had complete faith. Moses knew Joshua's heart very well. He was his servant. That's my guy. You see, it's always the servants who are the best leaders, while those who seek to lead are only looking to be served. Tell me I'm wrong. And Moses knew that that's what was needed for this battle with Amalek. Righteous men with the hearts of servants and unwavering faith. The due diligence always has to be done, especially if God doesn't tell you this time that he's going to fight for you. God didn't say, I'll do. Go grab your shields and your swords and your spears. Make sure they are tzaddikim and go face them. This is what Moshe is telling Yehoshua right now. Now you got to go fight for you, but with complete faith. And so Moses told Joshua to go get more people like him, because that's what would allow them to prevail against this particular enemy. And guess what? Amalek is the worst enemy, as we know. Not by might nor by power, though. We had the conversation regarding who the Erev Rav are in the world, right? We learned that Amalek are embedded within the Erev Rav, right? we also learned that the Erev Rav are embedded within Israel, right? This, of course, according to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, okay? No conspiracies here. Okay, just checking. Let's move on. Now look how serious this thing goes. That even though we may be men and women of faith, that our eyes do not deceive us. Or even more so, in who or what exactly are we putting our faith in, how dangerous it could be. So Moses said to Joshua, pick men for us and go and fight against Amalek. Tomorrow, Joshua, tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff that God gave me in my hand. The staff of God? The same staff that was used to decimate the great empire of Egypt? Whoa! To completely cut them apart piece by piece until we got to the head of the serpent? The same staff that brought about the plagues that defied nature? Wait. The staff that split the Red Sea? Yes, Joshua. One and the same. Golly gee, Batman, I'm so excited. Compose yourself, Robin, now go assemble the troops. And so he did. Joshua did as Moses had told him to fight against Amalek, and Moses, Aaron, and Hur ascended to the top of the hill. Now Moses is about to become the central conduit for the forces of God in the universe. It came to pass that when Moses would raise his hand, raise his hand, Israel would prevail, and when he would lay down his hand, Amalek would prevail. Now Moses' hands were heavy, so they took a stone and placed it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one from this side, one from this side, one from that side, this side, same thing in Hebrew. It says Hebrew is echad mizeh, echad mizeh. So he was with his hands in faith until sunset. I will explain. You have no idea what's going on here. It's very, very cool. Okay. First thing you should know. Moses did not hold out his hands, just like everyone may think. I know this makes for wonderful posters and images. He didn't stand like this. Okay? I thought he might have stood like this too, but he didn't. Might have been more visually impressive. All right. How did Moshe stand with his hands? His hands were together upwards, like this. Like this, upwards, towards the heavens. His hands were together. It came to pass that when Moses would raise his hand, so we know it's two hands, but now it says hand, raise his hand, and raise his hand, Israel would prevail, and when he would lay down his hand, Amalek would prevail. Which hand? Both hands. Together as one. You see. Furthermore, why did he go up to the hill with Aaron and with Hur? Look how this works. We know that Moses represents the Ze'ir Anpin, okay? As well as the central column. Again. Here's the central column. Mercy, judgment. Moses represents all of this. That's him. Like the sun, right? But the central of the Ze'ir Anpin is Tiferet. It sits in the middle. This is like Jacob. This is the beating heart of Israel. This is the Torah. Now, Aaron represents the right column, right? Here's Aaron. That's Netzach right here, but he's also a priest. So the right column is Netzach. It's mercy. It's Chesed. Excuse me. So Aaron stood to Moses' right. So you're going to be looking at these, obviously, in the other direction. Aaron stood to his right, and Hur, who is a warrior of the tribe of Judah, fierce warrior, judgment, fire, right? He stood on his left. Now, while Moses' hands were raised together as one, Israel would then prevail. But if one or the other would have dropped, Amalek would prevail. So it didn't matter which one dropped. This is why Tiferet, who is Jacob, Israel, is the perfect balance between mercy and judgment, and you need them both to be Israel. And when Israel are out of balance, they fall. Doesn't matter whether mercy overcomes or judgment overcomes. There has to be a balance. That's why God chose Tiferet Israel to carry his name. We shall not go to the right nor to the left, but straight on the way of the king. B'derech hamelech nelech. Furthermore, we know that Moses was likened to the sun, also Zeir Anpin, as we said, while Joshua was likened to the moon, Malchut, right? Below the sun and the moon, Malchut. This is why, and the moon receives its light, its power from the sun. This is why Moses had to be on top of the hill, while only Joshua had to be on the field. There was a whole electrical system going on over here. Joshua's victory, as well as Israel's, depended on their faith, but Moses' strength. Everything had to work flawlessly and perfectly here. Everyone had to be plugged into the right places. So in the meantime, Moses, in his physical form, is fighting a spiritual battle of the worst kind of bad guy. The worst. In the heavenly realm, while he's here, while something is physically going on down there. It's manifesting down there. And again, as incredibly powerful as he was a man. And there was just so much that even a Superman could take. And make no mistake, he was the closest thing we have ever seen to anything like this. The power surging from above and through him to the field of battle is something that we cannot even begin to comprehend. This reminds me of that scene in Avengers Infinity War, right? Where Thor, he goes to that planet and he's got to hold open that thing to watch the thing where Thor builds his hammer, right? He has to stand in front of the impact, the effect of a dying star, meaning the compression of its explosive power in order to forge his weapon so he could go beat the big guy, right? And he's standing there and he's taking the full force and the power surge of a dying star. He lasted long enough, right? Now Moses' hands were heavy. You see, they're standing like, and then boom, all that stuff. Anyways, cool. So think of that only spiritual power, which is stronger. Now Moses' hands were heavy, so they took a stone and placed it under him, and he sat on it. Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one from this side and one from that side. So we already know who stood on what side. So he was with his hands in faith until sunset. We're going to break this down. You know it. Here we already see hands in the plural tense because they began to come apart. It was not hand, it was now hands. He would support one hand with another. So in other words, if both of them come down, Israel's done. One comes down, Amalek is prevailing, Israel's still alive, still have a fighting chance. One would fall down, so Moses was supporting one hand. Okay, now this one's tired, now I've got to support this one. But he could not stay like this for long. Now again, it was all day. It wasn't just for half hour or an hour. It was all day until the sun had set. This was going on and on and on. One moment Israel were winning, and another they were losing. Okay, all right. Okay, come on. Now, they didn't understand what was going on. Those that were fighting, they didn't understand what was going on until God illuminated to them that the real battle isn't happening where they are, but that Moses was the one that was doing the heavy lifting, literally. He began to collapse under the weight of the fate of the world. Now, who do you think was resisting Moses? Do you think for one moment that Moses would not keep his hands together for the sake of Israel, which are the future of the world, right? If Israel is gone, the world is gone. And Amalek's purpose is to destroy Israel, i.e. destroying the world. The entire forces of the Sitra Achra were causing Moses' hands to separate. Forget about together. Just the separation. As soon as they separated, they became heavy. They had to be together. I don't know if he stood like this or whatever, but they had to be together. As soon as they were, do you hear me? As soon as Tiferet is separated, everything falls apart. As soon as Israel is separated, everything falls apart. And then as soon as they separated, then it got so heavy he could hardly hold his hands up. Remember, if Amalek prevails, the world ends. That's it. So they took a stone and they placed it under him, and he sat on it. Now, why a stone? Why not a nice cushy chair, right? Maybe even some pillows, a lazy boy? I don't know. Why does the text specifically say Evan? Evan represents many things, but in this context, it represents Malchut, kingdom that came to his aid from below, beneath Zeir Anpin. While Aaron and Hur were supporting his hands, one from this side, one from that side, Evan is also a combination of Av, father, and Ben, right? Now Moses, as we know, was exclusively in Da'at. Here, one more time. This is exclusive for Moses, Da'at. And, okay. This is for Moses, and Da'at is called the son of Abba, Chokhmah, wisdom, and Ima, Binah, understanding. Okay? So you see, these two produce Da'at, and this is where Moses stood. Furthermore, in the Hebrew, of the assistance that Moses received from Aaron and Hur, it is written on this side and on that side, right? In Hebrew it says, Mizeh echad u'mizeh echad. The word mizeh, from this. First of all, the word zeh, just so you know, is always an allusion to the 12 tribes. Zayin Hey, it's 7 and 5. It's 12 tribes. But mizeh has a numerical value of 52. Mem is 40 plus the 12. So that's 52, which is the same as Ben, son, meaning that this joint effort now became one. Which is when we read, Vayehi yadav emunah ad bo hashamish. Vayehi, it was, which is now in the single tense. It doesn't say Vayihiyu yadav, because it does say hands in plural, but it alludes to Vayehi as in it was, not they were. You understand? Meaning that his two hands, with the support of Aaron and Hur, the right column and the left column, mercy and judgment, as well as the Evan, the Malchut, just became one. Also, another very strong hint to that is the word Vayhi itself, which is the four-letter name of Hashem. It's the Yud Kei Vav Kei. Vayhi yadav emunah ad bo hashemish. And his hands became one in faith until the sun set. What is emunah? Emunah, yes, we know this is faith. But it is a combination of the letters Amen, El Melech Ne'eman, right? And the letters Vav, which is represented by Zeir Anpin, and the letter Hey, which is Malchut. El Melech Ne'eman, the combination of Zeir Anpin and Malchut. Moses just became the central conduit for the forces of God in the universe. Maybe I wish I could explain this better. But wow. Now, are we missing something? Where is the mighty staff? Did we not read in verse 9, so Moses said to Joshua, pick men for us and go out and fight against Amalek, and tomorrow I will stand on top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand? So where is this staff? So here's what happened. When Moses went up to the top of the hill, he thought that he would hear from God, right? God always said, take the staff, do this. Take the staff, do that. He's standing up top of the hill. The rabbi warriors are about to do battle. Hello? Nothing, right? He thought he would hear God to tell him, take the staff and go smite Amalek. Go do the thing that you do. Abracadabra, right? Destroy Amalek in the same manner that you destroyed Egypt. But this was not the case. As we can read, God was silent here. And if God is not speaking to Moses, that's not a good sign. That means that Moses needs to speak to God. How did Moses speak to God? Which is why he began to pray and started to connect himself. This is where he understood exactly what needed to be done. Moses realizes that God had sent Amalek, doubt, to Israel for several reasons, obviously. To take out those who had doubts and raised doubts themselves, midah keneged midah, and also just like God used Israel to draw out Egypt into the sea so they would be drowned, so too did God bring forth Amalek to Israel so they could be weakened but not destroyed. Joshua weakened Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. Vayechalesh Yoshua et Amalek vet amo lefi charev. So it's important to note that Moses did indeed have the staff in his hand to begin with, right? He had the mighty staff. But when he heard nothing, he placed it beside him. The staff was not needed right now. A different method was needed. When Joshua realized that Israel was winning, but for some reason he could not completely destroy them, yes, we're winning, but why are they still here? He looked at Moses and he saw the staff was not in his hand. The same staff that when placed in the hands of Moses could destroy anyone or anything. That gave him confidence. But now Joshua, the man who had complete faith, began to question but for a moment. That's when God spoke to Moses and told him to explain everything that we just learned to Joshua. See, it wasn't about the staff, and it wasn't necessarily about the man, but rather it was about the men of faith who pray, the men of faith who lead, and the men of faith who fight. They're all the same man, technically. We are one, right? So why were Amalek weakened and not destroyed? Because if they would become too powerful, first of all, they would destroy the world. So they had to be weakened. And why not destroy them right then and there? This is for you and I, for a time such as this. You see, the seed of doubt has not only reared its ugly head in the world for a while now, but it is the dominating force in the darkness of the world right now. Like I said, I see here in Israel supposed people of faith. This really hurts me when I see this. I'm watching prophecy unfold. I see here in Israel supposed people of faith, intellectuals, intelligent people who have understanding, be it religious or secular, but they know God. They forget about God and publicly state, Ein Moshiach, there is no Savior. These are not words that Jews should ever think, let alone speak. Because that doubt, that's the seed of Amalek infecting good people. I see good people falling. That's what's scary. People who should know better. That's what's scary, because they're doing everything but the one thing, the only thing that can help. Do you know why Amalek was not destroyed? You know what they did, right? They were the first who dared challenge God after the Exodus. And they died trying. They didn't care. And you may think, yeah, but we weakened them. We won, and since then they've been on the run. Think again. First of all, they're dominating today in the world, but when I was writing this, I was thinking of another Marvel movie for you. It's another reference from Iron Man 2. Okay? After the first encounter between Tony Stark, Robert Downey Jr., and Ivan Vanko, he's Mickey Rourke's thing. It wasn't the best movie, but whatever. I love this line. He caught Iron Man off guard. He hurt him a little bit, but in the end, Iron Man weakened him, but didn't destroy him. Remember, after Iron Man became Iron Man, he was also known as the Invincible Iron Man. That's like his title, like the Incredible Hulk, the Mighty Thor, the Invincible Iron Man. That's his title. And no one dared challenge him. Then afterwards, the two of them, they get together. He was visiting him in a prison cell. And they had this conversation, and I quote, and Tony says, "You had your chance and you missed." And Ivan smiles and says, "Did I?" If you can make God bleed, then people will cease to believe in him. You see this? Thank you, Marvel. And there will be blood in the water, and the sharks will come. Again, if you can make God bleed, then people will cease to believe in him. And there will be blood in the water, and the sharks will come. And when you're surrounded by sharks, all it takes is a drop of blood. Amalekites, Moabites, Ammonites, Amorites, Midianites, Philistines, Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, the Crusades, Islam, the West, the East, secularism, atheism, Nazism, liberals, self-hating Jews, corrupt Jewish leaders. Sometimes all it takes is a drop of blood to cause doubt, regardless of what anybody witnessed before. Doubt. To be uncertain about something, to believe that something may not be true or is unlikely, to have no confidence in something or someone. Doubt. So today I come before all of you and I say this. If there is doubt in your hearts, if there is fear, remember again that you are being tested. If your faith is lacking, then have enough faith to ask God to strengthen your faith. You see how that works. When you are full of faith, there is no fear. The power of Amalek in the world is currently causing you to doubt God. This is what the Nazis tried to do. They tried to snuff out God. They tried to inflict such horrors upon the chosen people, God's chosen people, that they would doubt God. This was a spiritual war, and it still is, and it's happening today in the free state of Israel. People don't see it, they don't see it as coming, but the flame is turning up and up. I'm telling you that you should doubt everything that you think that you know other than God. Everything else is a lie. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I'm making those changes myself. You really think nothing happened? Do you really think this is over? Come on. Have you forgotten how many times we have spoken of misdirection? Everyone, look at this! In the meantime, things are happening. Don't you don't pick up on this already? It's all the time, it's everywhere. You need to turn everything off, which is where I'm headed. Look over here, but what's really happening is over there. See, after last week, many people have lost faith. People are breaking or broken because most of you were hoping for a certain outcome. Certainly expecting an outcome, right? And because that didn't happen, the way that you thought it would, or the way you wanted it to go, you begin to doubt. And that's all that's needed. Seed. And if you doubt, then they have already won. Don't forget who sent Amalek. Are you forgetting that you're being tested? From what may seem the biggest problems to the smallest little trouble in your life, go back to your source before you lose that connection, before you do something foolish. I've told you this story a few times before, but it's relevant now more so than ever. When I was a kid, my dad would tell me a lot of his army stories. But one in particular stuck with me. Listen to me. When you go on a masa, on a journey, it's called masaot, like naso, masa, meriva, right? The journeys. When you go on a masa, you could either be climbing mountains or trekking through the desert from dusk till dawn. Full gear, right? Everything. You're going now for ever. So my dad told me how right before the break of dawn, as they're coming back or running all night, coming over whatever hill, then there it was. They would finally see the base. Once they saw the base, now I don't know, we don't just run in bunches, we run in lines, in twos. Okay, so we follow the leader basically. So once everyone started seeing the base, people could hardly walk, let alone run. All of a sudden, everyone gets a second wind, like, oh, there it is. Because like in any marathon, right? You get a second win when you see there's a finish line. Okay, mind over matter, right? That's exactly what I'm trying to tell you right now. The closer they got to the base, dudes were in better moods. They were excited. Listen to me again. The closer they got to what they thought was the base, people were in better moods. They were excited. They were happy and even a little bit cocky of how they just made it through now we're finally, now this is going to happen and that's going to happen. And here comes the sun, here comes the light, and here comes the front gate. And finally we can rest from that long, hard night. But then, as they ran up to the gate, following the staff sergeant and the commanding officer, they quickly realized they weren't going home. It wasn't over. But they wanted them to think it was over. They ran right past the front gate. My dad told me many guys fell at that point. They just gave up. They thought it was the end, but it wasn't. And now they were headed back into the desert, not knowing if they would have the strength to carry on. They were running on fumes as it was. I think the words he used was, and guys were starting to drop like flies. Guys started dropping like flies. That's what he was saying. This was back in 1968 in Israel. Fast forward 30 years to 1998, and Kreisman Jr. over here is now in the exact same position. One of our treks all night long. Coming back in the morning, there's the base. I wasn't thinking about this when this was happening. But all of a sudden, I'm like, wait a minute. Hold on a second. And it's as if I saw it coming. After a grueling, non-stop all-nighter, we ran right past the gate and back into the desert. And guess what happened? Guys started dropping like flies. But not me. I was laughing because I knew it was coming. I don't know. I probably might have dropped like flies myself if I did not know what was coming. You see? Now, still, even though I knew it was coming, I didn't know how much longer we'd be out there. I didn't know what. Plenty of times they would take us out on an all-nighter, or like a ridiculously long trek. And then finally, when we're thinking we're going to sleep, they're like, no, now we're awake for another 24 hours after the whole trek. They would completely want to break you down. In times of war, you don't sleep, you know? Anyway, but see, here's the thing. I knew the commanders were tired as well. I knew that they weren't going to go for too much longer. I knew that the worst was already, the length part was behind us. Now is the hardest part because we're kind of running on fumes, but it can't go on for much longer. Especially not during the blazing hot desert sun. But most importantly, I knew that this was a test. Shortly after that, we made a few rounds in the vicinity, went back out to the desert, went over some hills and whatnot, and we came home. Just knowing that it's a test gives you strength and helps you focus. Because this specific test is designed to make you lose focus. Just as this test is. This test is designed to bring in the element of fear. Why? So you can overcome it and stay focused. Mentally, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And so, we have already read what our prophets and our sages have given us from thousands of years ago. We will be tested. We are being tested. On what? On our faith. Emunah. El Melech Ne'eman. And the connection between Zeir Anpin and Malchut. We are currently fighting Amalek. And the most dangerous thing, the arch enemy of faith is what? Is doubt. Safek. That is Amalek. So, my friends, the story isn't over yet. We still have to circle the base a few more times. They got to make it look good. It's going to be tough. Maybe even take a quick, long jog out there, but it's okay. We've been in this journey for almost 6,000 years. What's a little while longer? Hold on, we're close. One foot in front of the other. I have no doubt that we will see some things. I have no doubt who is in control of all things. I have no doubt at all. Welcome to the other side. Talk soon. Bye.